Hi, boys and girls. This is Grandma Sheila, and our story today is called Overnight Guest. Well, our story took place back in the early 1900s, and the Depression was going on. Well, the farmer, and this whole story, he calls himself I as he tells the story. So that's exactly what I'm going to do. Well, the farmer had gone to the barn to do his evening chores. He said, I got started. It was a bad rainy night, and I was working away, and then I went over and I looked out the window, and down the road a ways, there was a car parked just around the corner of the pasture. And he got close, and he said, I looked out that window to see what was going on out there, and I saw a young man. And the rain was just coming down in sheets, and he kept jumping out of his car, going out, lifting the hood on the front of it, messing around under there, and then he would run back and try to start it again, but it wouldn't even turn over at all, that engine wouldn't. Well, he kind of looked like he didn't know what he was doing. But I thought, I need to get the chores done. So he went back to milking the cows and tending to everything there in the barn. When he finally got done, he went outside and he latched the barn door, and he turned around, and sure enough, he said when he looked down the road, there still was that young man out there messing with that car. So he thought, I guess I better go help him. So he went back in the barn and he got out his flashlight and he headed down the road. By this time it was dark. Well, when he got down there, the young man was sitting in the front seat, all dejected. And he said, I looked at him, I knocked on the window and he opened it. And I said, is your car broken down? And the young guy, he said, it won't start, and I just gotta go. I gotta get going. I gotta make it start. Can you help me? Well, the farmer, he said, okay, I'll look under the hood. So he got down under there and he looked around. He checked this and he checked that. Finally, he came back around to where the young man was, and in his hand, he had a coil. Those cars all had coils in them. And he said, your coil's bad. And the young man looked at him, he said, it can't be bad. I bought one just last week. How can it be bad again? Well, the farmer, he smiled at him knowingly. He said, I know all about coils. You can buy them one day, they can run for a couple hours, and then they're dead again. Or you can get one and you can put it in, and it'll run for years without a bit of trouble. Nobody knows what's the matter with coils. But he said, my car is just like yours. It's the same brand. I think what we should do is I should go to the barn and get a couple of my horses and a long rope, and I should hook it to the front of your car, and I can pull it inside the barn so we can work in there where it's dry. Well, The young man agreed to that, so the farmer headed off through the rain, coming back with 2 horses and a long rope. Well, he pulled that little car into the barn, and the farmer said, well, since your car and my car are the same brand, I'm going to take the coil out of mine and I'm going to put it in yours, and then we'll make sure it's the coil. Well, it didn't take the farmer long to get that coil out and put it in the other little car, and sure enough, it ran just like it was brand new. The farmer said, yep, it's your coil. Now down the road here, there's a man called Bill David, and he sells car parts. We can just run down there, since we've already got the coil in your car. I'll run with you, and we can go down and buy another coil. We can get it in your car, and you can be on your way. Well, the young man seemed restless and anxious to be going. He got more restless and agitated the closer they got to the man's shop. And the farmer didn't understand, because the young guy drove his car back around behind the shop. And he kind of squashed down in his seat and he said, I'm all cold and wet. Can I just sit here? And he handed the farmer a $10 bill. He said, would you get it for me? I'll just wait here where it's warm. Well, the farmer thought that was a little odd, but he went in, and he soon came back carrying the coil. They drove that car back into the barn, and the farmer got immediately under the hood and just had gotten that coil in when the barn door opened, and in came Linda, the farmer's daughter. And Linda said, Daddy, Mommy says that dinner's ready. And then she turned to the young man and she pointed at him and she said, Mama says you're supposed to come in and eat too. Well, the young man, he said, I just can't. I just gotta go. Besides, it's too much trouble. Well, the farmer looked at him and he said, you don't know my wife, Jane. She's the best cook in the whole state. And nobody comes to our house at mealtime without eating. So you better go in, or my Jane will come right out here to the barn and lay down into that muck in front of your car, so you can't go till you've eaten. Well, the young guy, he didn't know what to say to that. He envisioned in his mind the farmer's wife laying in the muck in the barn, trying to keep him from going, and he decided, well, if she's that determined of a person, I best go and eat. So he went inside, and he and the farmer got cleaned up, and then they went and sat down to what looked like a wonderful supper. But the kid, even though it looked so good and it smelled good and he was hungry, he took his fork and he was just scooting the food round and round on his plate. And the farmer noticed that Jane was watching him, and she had kind of a funny look on her face. But when they all got done eating, the young man turned to thank the farmer and said he was going to go. Well, the farmer's wife went and looked out the window. She pulled back the curtain and she said, you can't go anywhere. It's dark and it's pouring down rain out there. Now you're already wet, you're already cold. You're gonna stay here for the night. I have an extra bed. It's no problem. Just plan on sleeping here. Well, Jane wasn't one to be argued with. And so the young man finally thanked her, and she said, now, just give me that suit of yours, and I'll make sure it's dry for you by morning. Well, when the Young man went to bed. His mind started going round and round. He turned this way and he turned that way and he couldn't sleep. Finally, he fell asleep, and morning came before he even knew it. He got up and he stuck his head out the door to see about his clothes. And the farmer's wife was in the kitchen ironing up his suit to make it look good again. You know, a suit, especially in those days, they were mostly wool. If you get them wet, they looked bad. So she had ironed it up, and she said, "Here's your clothes, now get ready, breakfast is ready." Well, he was like a different young man that morning. They all noticed it. He sat down on the table, he smiled at the farmer's wife, and he ate like he hadn't seen food in forever. When he got done, he thanked them both again, and he rushed out through that sunny morning. And he got in his car, and the farmer and his wife stood on the porch to watch him go. Well, you know, the night before, he had been heading toward the city. But this morning, when he got his car out of the barn, he turned around and he headed off down the country road again, the way he'd come. That didn't make sense to either the farmer or his wife. The farmer's wife said, well, maybe he got lost out there yesterday in the farm land or something. I don't know. But, you know, the farmer and his wife, they had worship that morning and worship the night before, and they had prayed for the young man. So days passed, weeks passed, months passed, and they never heard from the young man again. They really hadn't expected to. But then years passed, and they basically almost forgot about that young man, that stranger that they had entertained. Well, one day, the farmer, he went out to his mailbox, and there was a letter in his box, and he tore it open and he unfolded it. And boys and girls, I want to read that letter to you. Dear Mr. McDonald, I don't suppose you remember the young man who you helped years ago when his car broke down. It's been a long time, and I imagine you've helped many others. But I doubt if you have helped anyone quite the way you helped me. You see, I was running away that night. I had in my car a large sum of money. I had taken it from my employer, and I was running away with it. I want you to know, sir, though, that I had been raised by good Christian parents, and they didn't raise me to be like that, but I'd forgotten all their teachings, and I had got in with the wrong crowd. I knew I had made a terrible, terrible mistake, but you and your wife were so nice to me. That night in your home, I began to see where I had gone wrong. Before morning, I made a decision. The next day, I turned back to home. I went back to my employer, and I told him the whole story. I begged him for mercy, and he forgave me. He could have prosecuted me, sir. He could have sent me to prison for years. But he was a good man, like you and your wife were. He took me back to my old job, and I never strayed again. I'm married now. I have a pretty young wife and two small children. I've worked my way into a very good position in my company. I'm not wealthy, but I'm comfortably well off. You know, I could reward you and your wife handsomely for what you did for me that night. But I don't believe that's what you would have wanted. So I've done something. I've established a fund of money to help others, other young boys who have made the same mistake I did. In this way, I hope I am paying you back for what you did for me. God bless you, sir, and your good wife, who helped me more than you know. Robert Fane. The farmer, he looked down at that letter and he headed directly to the house and he handed it to his wife. He said, "This came in the mail today." She took that letter and she looked at the postmark. It was from Chicago. Who did she know in Chicago? But she opened it up and she read that letter. When she finished the letter, the tears were filling her eyes and they were running down her cheeks. And do you know what? She looked at her husband and she started to quote from the Bible. "I was hungry and you fed me. You took me in. You clothed me." And she smiled at her husband and he smiled back. He knew that his wife had practiced what they had been teaching their daughter all those years. And this time, someone had majorly found Jesus from it. You know, boys and girls, sometimes as you get older, you may do things that your mommy and daddy had taught you never to do. You may think, "It'll be wonderful. Look at what I can buy with all this money. Look what I can do." But what they didn't know was you would spend your life running and hiding because somebody was going to chase after you to take you to prison. Asking forgiveness when you make a mistake is the best thing you can do. And that young man that day had learned that that was the best thing to do. And now he was free. He could go where he wanted. He had a family and a good wife and a happy life. You know, boys and girls, when we follow what Jesus tells us to do, to bring people in when you see that they need help, to be like Jesus was to people, you will be happy. Thank you, boys and girls. I'll see you next week. Bye-bye now.